The most important factor about Isaac was that in him was the continuation of the promise of God to Abraham. Now, Isaac showed little interest in marriage. He seemed to like the single life. But finally, his father arranged for him to be married to Rebekah, who happened to be his first cousin. After a while, Isaac and Rebekah had twin sons, Jacob and Esau. I wonder if some of you would help me read today. We are looking at Genesis chapter 24, verse 4, and then verses 10 through 33. Genesis 24, verse 4, and then verses 10 through 33. Can I get a reader for those verses? G, go ahead if you will.
Then the servant put him and his master's camels in his cart, taking all kinds of choice gifts from his master, and he set out and went to Abram.
Isn't that a great story? One of the things I want to point out to you is the difference in the way that this story reads in the story of Adam and Eve, which was very sparse in terms of detail. But now when we get to the story of Isaac and Rebekah, there's all this wonderful embellishment of the story. And when I say embellishment, I don't mean to say that it wasn't true, but all of this detail, it's just like you're reading a fairy tale, isn't it? A well-written book. And what a great story it is. Now, I don't know that I want to suggest this method of choosing a wife to any of you. Apparently, this servant just went and said, okay, the next woman who comes out who offers to give me water and my camels is the one. I don't know if any of you met your spouse or your beloved in that way, where you just knew that they were the one the first time you saw them. But in this case, it appears that the servant was actually had gone to find the wife for Isaac. And let's read also verses 48 through 58. If someone will read that for us. Doesn't matter what version you have, as long as it's the Bible.
I'll take it.
All right, Tom, thank you.
This is excuse me, this is out of Good News Bible, by the way.
Okay.
I knelt down and worshipped the Lord. I praised the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me straight to my master's relatives, where I found his daughter from my master's son. Now, if you intend to fulfill your responsibility toward my master and treat him fairly, please tell me. If not, say so, and I will decide what to do.
Okay, so Rebekah has the opportunity here. She's, again, the idea of being chosen shows up, doesn't it? I mean, God has something significant for her to do. I've just spent a weekend with some folks who talked about being called. And we talk about that at church a lot, don't we? The fact that God's chosen us for something meaningful and something substantial in life. And if we didn't believe that we were somehow special and that God loves us, and has chosen us, we'd be a ship without a sail, wouldn't we? But in fact, God has chosen us, and it's interesting to see how God chose certain people throughout history to fulfill God's purpose, and Rebekah being the one that we're thinking about now. And I think, as I said a while ago, good idea to ask Rebekah what she wanted to do, since these men are making all these arrangements. And they did, but I could not help. I have to tell you, I read this story now with a new appreciation as a father who has had daughters leave. Because what do her parents want? Let her stay with us a few more days. And then someone says, but let us ask the girl what she wants to do. And she says, I'm ready to get out of here. You know? I'll never forget a Mac Davis song from the 70s. I think it was actually on the country charts. And one of the lines was, I thought life was Lubbock, Texas in my rearview mirror. You remember that? And it seems to be a universal thing with young people. You know, I just want to see the world and get away from the old hometown. It's interesting to see how that has not changed in these thousands of years since Rebekah's time. Now, after a while, Isaac and Rebekah had twin sons, and their names were Jacob and Esau. Okay. Now, these sons were very different in appearance, in demeanor, and in interest. Jacob became the favorite of his mother. He was a mama's boy, as it were. And while Esau was favored by his father, Isaac. Now, Genesis 24 and 25 contain more information about that. The names of Jacob and Esau are telling in and of themselves in Hebrew. The name Jacob, or Yaakov, as it's pronounced in Hebrew, the name Jacob means, and these boys were twins. I think I said that already. But get this now. The name Jacob literally means one who takes by the heel. You know, so the idea is that even as he was being born, he had hold of his brother's heel. It also means supplanter, one who supplants. S-U-P-P-L-A-N-T. What does it mean to supplant someone? To supersede them or to take their place. If you really don't want a supplanter. That's someone who's after your job. Larry Lancaster told me that he was my supplanter. He said I was lucky to have a job after he got through speaking on Sunday. You just have to love Larry. All right. The name Esau means, I kid you not, red and hairy. Red and hairy. Red and hairy. Not H-A-R-R-Y, but H-A-I-R-Y. Because Esau was an outdoorsman, right? What do we call people who stay outdoors all the time, especially if they're on tractors? Rednecks. All right. So Esau was sort of a redneck. He was maybe the original redneck. He liked to hunt and, be outdoors all the time. That was just kind of his deal. And Jacob was more of an inside guy and maybe a scholar, intellectual type. I can remember when I was a kid, I've always loved to read, and I remember one particular day I was sitting in the recliner in the house reading a book, and my dad came in and said, "I want you to get outside." He said, "I don't want you to grow up to be a mama's boy." I'll never forget that. And I did. And I love being outside, but I also still love books. So I guess I did that with a pretty good combination of characteristics. Jacob and Esau. And still today they sort of typify the two ends of the spectrum, don't they, in terms of personality. They were very different. So as other siblings have been known to do, Jacob and Esau developed a rivalry early in life. Any of you have sibling rivalries in your family? I never thought of such a thing. All right, here's a good story. I got to tell you this. My daddy and my Uncle Bobby they're both deceased now, but they were close to the same age, about 18 months apart, actually. And they got into a fight out in the yard one day, and then they were just flailing away at each other. I mean, they were going at it. And so they said that my granddaddy came at them with his belt and just started swinging. And my dad said that was the only time he'd ever tried to get on the bottom. Jacob and Esau might be like that. They might have been like that. And while they were still young, still boys, Jacob offered the very hungry Esau a bowl of stew or red pottage. It was cooked and ready for eating. They were so young that Jacob sort of tricked Esau with this food. Perhaps Esau had been out hunting and he was very hungry. And so he said, "Tell you what, you want this?" And Esau said, "Man, yeah, I'm starved, I'm famished." And Jacob said, "I'll give it to you if you give me your birthright." And it's possible that since they were still young that Esau didn't fully understand what his birthright was. But this gives us an early indication that Jacob is trying to cheat Esau out of something. And he does that. He's supplanting him, isn't he? He's trying to take his place. Now, Esau was born first. He was the elder brother, even though they were twins, but Jacob had him by the heel. As he came out, even then, he was after his birthright, as it were. Sometime later, with the assistance of their mother now, because Jacob was her favorite, Jacob schemed to steal the traditional father's blessing from Esau while he was away on a hunting trip. Chapter 27 tells us about that. In fact, let's read that, verses 1 through 38. 27, 1 through 38. Who will read for us? Who shall I send and who will go for us? All right, thank you.
Is the whole chapter?
Well, verses 1 through 38, is that the whole chapter?
No.
Okay.
When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim, so that he could not see, he called Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." And he answered, "Here I am." He said, "Behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver, and your bow, and go out to the field, and hunt game for me. And
That's kind of an emotional story, isn't it? I've read it a bunch of times, and for some reason, as I was listening to it just now, I thought, my goodness.
You know, Jacob becomes Israel, which is interesting in and of itself. When you think about how Israel now traces back to the supplanter, you know, who stole the birthright. And several things come to mind as I listen to this story again. One of them is that it must be true because it's not flattering. It's not the kind of story that we would make up about our own family, you know. When we talk about our ancestors, we want to talk about their greatness. I can remember doing some genealogical research a while back, and someone said, "You better be careful about climbing that family tree. There'll be a monkey up it." You know, and we don't want to tell the stories about our ancestral monkeys. You know, we want to tell about the great patriarchs of our family. And but here, this story of Jacob supplanting Esau has survived over the years. The other thing, there are two more issues that I want to just discuss briefly. One of them is the idea of the power of the spoken word in ancient Israel. The word meant something, the spoken word. If you gave someone your word, that was your bond. To promise something to someone could not be taken back. Isaac could not say, "Oh, I withdraw my blessing from you because I gave it to the wrong person," even though he'd been tricked into giving it away. When it went out, it could not return to him, you see. It had already been given. And one of the things that Isaac said to Jacob in giving him the blessing was, "Your mother's sons will bow down to you." That means your brothers, of course. And then when Esau finally came in, Jacob said to him, "I've made him your Lord. I can't do anything about that now. It's done." So if we're serious about studying the Bible and understand what the Bible is trying to teach us, then we should learn something from this about giving our word. And the power of the spoken word. You know, words can bless or they can curse. And it's up to us what we do with our words. A word too harshly spoken or a word of curse cannot be retracted. Even if you know that it hurts somebody after you said it. And even if you say, "I'm sorry," you can't unsay it. can you? And once that word is let go, it's like an arrow that's been fired from the bow, and it will find its mark and do damage. And in the same way, a positive word is a blessing. I've already referred to Larry Lancaster once today. I'll take his name in vain again. and say that he spent a lot of time as a school principal administrator managing people, teachers. And I know a lot of teacher stories since I'm married to one, and I'm sure they're not easy to manage sometimes. Some of you have been teachers. You were easy to manage, of course. But Larry talks about finding someone doing something right rather than catching someone doing something wrong. And we ought to learn how to do that in our lives. We ought to try to catch people doing something right and then let that positive word of blessing go to them. But be that as it may, even though he had been tricked, Isaac blessed the wrong son. At least not the eldest one, which the eldest son in this culture always received the father's blessing. That's just the way it worked. And Isaac therefore intended to bless Esau, who was his favorite, but instead blessed Jacob because of Jacob's deceit and his mother's trickery. And so it stood. And then Isaac said, I can do nothing about it. And the story closes with Jacob lifting up his voice and weeping because the blessing had been misplaced. I'm sorry, with Esau doing that. Laura, could you read just those last few verses again? Basically, the blessing of Isaac that was given to Jacob. Just the last few verses would be down through, it would conclude with maybe around 35 to 38, somewhere in there.
Okay, start with 35.
37 probably be the place to know.
Well, if you're talking about what Isaac gave to Esau, that starts with 39.
No, to Jacob.
Yeah,
To Jacob. The blessing that Isaac gave to Jacob.
Verse 28, that's where that starts. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you.
Okay, so this is another affirmation of the covenant that God made with Abraham. When God said, I'll make you a great nation, make your descendants as plentiful as the stars of the sky and the sands of the seashore, and you will be a blessing to all nations. And you see how through Isaac and now through Jacob, this covenant is being reaffirmed. Now, a lot of you that are here, in my Baptist dispensation, there was the sweetest lady that you can imagine. Her name was Evelyn Turnage in First Baptist Church of Dunn. And every time I would say at the end of the sermon today, I'm going to give one of those just as I am invitations, and we're going to sing all 70 verses. And we'll keep singing until they come, Miss Evelyn would be the first one down the aisle, and she was the most saintly person I've ever known, right beside my grandmama Suggs. Okay? So when we talked about needing to teach the Bible and learn the Bible, a lot of you who've come today are the people who already know about the Bible. You already know a lot about the Bible anyway, and thank you for being here. But I just want to say that I know that as I talk to you about these things, I'm probably repeating some things you already know. But I just want to make sure that we all are at the same place, that we're bringing the whole class along, and that if there's someone here who doesn't really know much about the Bible yet, that will, at the end of the class, I can know that we've all heard the same material. And maybe some of you sat through Sunday school when you were a child and you heard some of these things. You just need to have it reviewed. And then some of you, for one reason or another, have not learned some of these basic stories of the Old Testament. Of course, we'll do the New Testament in the fall. But so forgive me if I ever seem like I'm, telling you stuff you already know. I think I've told the church this before, but the McDuffies don't like that. We don't want anyone to tell us something we already know because we feel like they're treating us like we're stupid. That's not what I'm doing, okay? But I just want to, it's an opportunity to make some theological points and some points of scholarship here that you may not have gotten along the way. You may not have understood that the covenant was repeatedly reaffirmed through the generations after Abraham. And even in Jesus Christ, you know, who was the fulfillment of the covenant from our Christian point of view. So Rebekah was now fearing that Esau would kill Jacob for obvious reasons. I mean, you know, Esau was sad and grief-stricken about this, but he was also angry. So she gets Jacob out of there. She arranges for Jacob to flee to Haran, which is her home, and to select a wife from among her people. Chapter 28 gives the details of that, and we'll talk about that later on. As he fled from Esau's wrath, Jacob had a dream in which God, who identified himself as the God of Abraham and Isaac, renewed the promise to Jacob in this dream. He named the place where it happened Beth-el, or Bethel. All the Bethel churches in the world are named after this place where Jacob had this dream. Let's read that dream, verses 10 through 18. Chapter 28, verses 10 through 18. Read the story of that dream. I'll let one of you read.
And Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran. And he lighted upon a certain place and tarried there all night because the sun was set. And he took of the stones of that place and put them for his pillows and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, the ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending upon it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac. The land whereon thou liest, to thee will I give it, and thy seed.
So we have to sing the song. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder, soldiers of the cross. So this is the dream, right? There's a ladder ascending to heaven, and he sees angels ascending and angels descending. Any ideas about what all that means? What would angels be? What do angels do? What's their? What did Billy Graham say that angels were?
Guardians.
You're right. The guardians. Also, God's secret messengers. So if that's what angels are, God's secret agents, and they're moving up and down the ladder, what's happening? The Word of God is descending, is coming to us, the covenant, and then our prayers are ascending to God. So there's a ladder, but also a bridge between heaven and earth. God is revealing himself in a new way. Don't you think it means all of those things? Yes, Aaron.
What are we supposed to take from the fact that at no point is God kind of saying, hey, Jacob, you really shouldn't have done that. That was a bad idea.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm glad she asked that.
There's no censure for what he just said.
Yeah.
I mean, did he plan all along for him to be the next leader? If so, why wasn't he born first?
It's just that predetermination, predestination thing, isn't it? Betty's saying, I don't know if you can hear her or not, but Betty's saying that God planned all along for Jacob to be the next leader. And I can remember as a boy asking these same kinds of questions of my theologian mother, who would say, well, son, God knew. And what Jacob meant for evil, God meant for good, which is going to come up in the next chapter of Genesis.
They intended it through treachery.
I'm sorry?
He obtained this through
Oh yeah,
treachery.
I know, and he was a very treacherous guy. This is the exact thing I was saying a while ago when I said it must be true, or they wouldn't have reported it. You know, it's not flattering for Israel to be named after the person who got, you know, what he got by stealing it. Yet the conquest of the Promised Land was the same kind of thing. When Joshua comes with the armies of Israel, they have to kill the Canaanites before they can possess it. I mean, I don't know how to square that with the Christian revelation, the revelation of God to us in Christ. You know, Jesus wouldn't even speak up for himself at his trial. You know, he was meek and lowly, as it were, a suffering servant. So very much different than these characters of the Old Testament. I think that we have to view everything, and obviously we do view everything that we read in the Old Testament from the perspective of Jesus. And where I am with all of that, and you may have a different kind of observation about it, but what we're seeing here is the gradual, all of this is new, what God is doing and how God is revealing himself to God's people over these centuries. And, you know, we're reading this in compressed time. You know, we read some last week, and, you know, hundreds of years have passed since what we read last week took place. And, you know, we're reading a story that took place over, you know, scores of years in one sitting. And so, but what's happening is that God is continually showing his people, and they are coming to understand more of who he is. And this is taking great amounts of time for this to happen. And they're coming from a culture where they weren't even monotheistic. They believed in agricultural gods. They worshiped the sun and their ancestors, and, you know, all kinds of deities, plural. And so still they have not yet come to understand who God is. They are calling him the God of Abraham. And he's becoming also the God of Isaac now, and will be referred to in time as the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. But still he's not been called, chronologically, the name Yahweh has not been revealed to them, because that doesn't happen until Moses sees the burning bush. And he says, who should I tell them sent me? And for the first time, God says, Yahweh, I am that I am. Now, the writers of this material use the name Yahweh in Genesis, but they're writing after the time of Moses, you see, so they know his name at that point. But here, when these patriarchs are referring to God, they call him the God of Abraham, God of Isaac. And God is still showing them who he is. So they are being processed out of this primitive, polytheistic, that means many gods, culture, and they're just beginning to understand who God is, but they're still acting like heathens. You see? But I guess God just didn't have much to work with back then, and these were the best people he could find. As bad as they were, you know, they were still hitting each other in the head with clubs, and you know. Several years later, after this event at Bethel, or Bethel, House of God, several years later, while encamped on the bank of the river Jabbok, the brook Jabbok, Jabbok, Jacob wrestled with an unknown man, an angel, if you will, during the night, only to find the next morning that the person he had wrestled with had been God, or God's messenger. He was called Israel, and the name Israel means he who strives with God, or he who wrestles with God. Jacob is supplanter in Israel. From this point on, Jacob would be called Israel. But the name Israel means he who strives with God, or wrestles with God. Esau prospered on his own, as we've already said. He did well. His people became the Edomites, Edomites, the Edomites. Look at the maps in the back of your textbook. If you have it, please. I think maybe I can show you where the Edomites settled. Yeah. Plate 11, XI. Plate 11. You see the Dead Sea? You see Idumea? Idumea, plate 11.
Yeah.
Idumea takes its name from Edom, or Esau. So the Idumeans became the descendants of Esau. What's the name? The name of the city? Brian, when you went to the Holy Land, you may have Petra. Petra. That's. Have you seen the beautiful temple? It shows up in Raiders of the Lost Ark. The beautiful temple that's carved into the mountainside, into that rock. It's a market house or something like that. Yeah. But anyway, there's really not much behind that. I watched a thing on YouTube recently about the Idumeans.
It's just carved out.
Yeah, it's a facade, really, but there's a room in there, but it looks like the entrance to a beautiful building, and maybe they intended to carve a whole mansion in there, but they never got it done. But the Idumeans lived in those cliffs and those rocks there in the city of Petra, and it's just south of the Dead Sea, and that map shows you where the Idumeans were, but they were the descendants of Esau, the Edomites.